No one would ever choose you. The cruel echo of her ex-fiancé's brutal public declaration still hung in the air as the music abruptly died. The grand hall plunged into a dead silence. Then, the crowd parted. Bypassing the trembling nobles, the dreaded Alpha King stepped forward and, to the shock of everyone, bowed at her feet. The decennial lunar gala at Winterbourne Keep was less a celebration and more a bloodless battlefield. Beneath the light of 100 crystal chandeliers, alliances were forged, fortunes were broken, and mates were claimed. The scent in the air was an intoxicating, suffocating blend of expensive Parisian perfumes, roasted venison, and the sharp, underlying musk of hundreds of territorial werewolves trying to mask their feral natures in silk and velvet. Natalia of House Smith stood near the periphery of the ballroom, her back straight and her chin tipped upward. Her gown, a deep emerald silk, was beautiful but noticeably dated, a relic from 5 years ago, tailored to fit. The Smith family name, once synonymous with wealth and military prowess in the Western Territories, had been decimated by the border skirmishes of the last decade. They had lost their lands, their warriors, and finally, their influence. All Natalia had left was her pride, and even that was currently under siege. Just a week prior, Caleb Ashburn had sat in her family's drawing room and broken their 3-year betrothal. Caleb was the newly minted alpha of the Ashburn pack, a rising star in the aristocratic circles. He had held her hands, feigned a sorrowful expression, and claimed it was a matter of pack security. "I need an alliance, Natalia," he had murmured, refusing to meet her eyes. "A true alpha needs a Luna who commands respect, who brings power to the table. I will always care for you, but you are diminished." She had let him go with quiet dignity, burying the agony of his betrayal deep within her chest. But the truth of his pack security was currently draped over his arm, wearing a gown of woven silver. Victoria Harrington, the daughter of Lord Richard Harrington, the wealthiest duke in the northern province. Natalia took a slow sip of her champagne, the bubbles tasting like ash on her tongue. She had only attended the gala tonight because to hide away would confirm the whispers that she was a broken, discarded woman. She needed to show the court that a Smith did not cower. But Caleb, it seemed, was not content with merely discarding her. He needed to make an example of her. As the orchestra transitioned into a sweeping waltz, Natalia turned to make her way toward the terrace to catch her breath. She didn't see Caleb approaching until he materialized in her path, Victoria clinging to his bicep with a smug, territorial smirk. "Natalia," Caleb's voice rang out, louder than necessary. The conversations of the nearby aristocrats faltered, eyes shifting toward the trio. "I am surprised to see you here. I would have thought the entry tithe for the Winterbourne Gala was far beyond the current means of the Smith estate." Natalia's grip tightened on the stem of her glass, but she kept her expression perfectly blank. "Good evening, Caleb. Lady Victoria. The keep is open to all founding bloodlines. My family's seat at this table was paid for in blood centuries before the Ashburns learned to walk upright." A few shocked gasps rippled through the onlookers. Victoria's face flushed an ugly mottled red, and her wolf's aggressive scent spiked in the air. Caleb's eyes narrowed, his pride wounded. The rising murmurs of the crowd acted like a catalyst for his ego. He stepped forward, raising his voice so that the music seemed to dwindle behind the sheer force of his alpha command. He wanted to crush her, to ensure the Harringtons saw his absolute detachment from his impoverished ex. "Founding bloodline?" Caleb sneered, his voice echoing across the now hushed ballroom. The orchestra sputtered to a halt. Hundreds of faces turned toward them. "You cling to the ghosts of your ancestors because you have nothing yourself. Look at you, Natalia. You are 24 and your wolf hasn't even manifested. You are a dull blood, a dormant." Natalia felt the blood drain from her face. Her dormant status was a closely guarded family secret, something she had only confessed to him in the sacred trust of their betrothal. To weaponize it here, in front of the entire pack aristocracy, was a profound and unforgivable violation. "Caleb, stop," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly despite her best efforts. "Why? So you can keep lying to these people?" Caleb mocked, turning to address the crowd, playing the part of the tragic victim who had narrowly escaped a trap. "The Smiths tried to trick my pack into a mating with a defective female to save their dying house. She has no wolf, no wealth, and no power." He turned back to Natalia, his eyes cold and cruel. "You are obsolete, Natalia. You thought you could guilt me into honoring a childhood promise? Look around. There is a reason you stand alone in the shadows. Look at the pity in their eyes. No pack would take you. No alpha would want you. No one would choose you. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating weight. Natalia stood frozen, the heat of profound humiliation burning behind her eyes. The faces of the crowd blurred, some sneering, some pitying, all of them witnesses to her utter destruction. She had been stripped bare, her deepest insecurities and family secrets laid out for public consumption. She opened her mouth, searching for a biting retort, but her throat was completely closed. The sheer malice of the man she had loved for 3 years paralyzed her. He had won. He had secured his place in high society by stepping on her throat. No one? A voice rumbled. It was not a shout. It was barely above a conversational cadence. Yet, the sound vibrated through the floorboards, rattling the crystal in the chandeliers, and striking a primal chord of terror in the chest of every werewolf in the room. The temperature in the grand hall plummeted. The scent of ozone, dark pine, and ancient, unyielding power flooded the space, instantly crushing Caleb's arrogant alpha aura into nothingness. Several weaker wolves in the crowd physically dropped to their knees, unable to withstand the sudden atmospheric pressure. From the shadowed dais at the far end of the hall, a space reserved exclusively for the royal sect, which had remained empty all night, a figure emerged. King Emery Rochester, the Alpha King of the unified territories. He was a myth wrapped in violence, a ruler who had unified the warring packs 3 centuries ago through sheer, brutal dominance. He rarely attended social functions, viewing them as petty squabbles among children. Yet, here he was. He was strikingly tall, dressed in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit that seemed to absorb the light around him. His raven hair was pushed back, and his eyes, a piercing, unnatural silver, were locked entirely on Natalia. The crowd scrambled backward, parting like the Red Sea to clear a wide path for him. Caleb's smug expression dissolved into stark, trembling panic. He immediately lowered his head, exposing his neck in a desperate show of submission, dragging Victoria down with him. Emery did not even glance at Caleb. He walked with the predatory grace of an apex predator stalking a deer, his heavy footfalls echoing in the deathly silent hall. He stopped directly in front of Natalia. Up close, he was terrifyingly beautiful. The sharp lines of his jaw and the cold intensity of his gaze made Natalia's breath hitch. She knew she should bow, knew she should bare her throat, but she was frozen, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. Emery reached out, his large, scarred hand gently wrapped around her trembling fingers. His touch sent a violent, electric shock racing up her arm, a sensation so intense it made her gasp. Deep inside her chest, something ancient and dormant stirred a heavy, resonant vibration that felt suspiciously like a growl. The Alpha King slowly sank into a deep, formal bow, bending his head until his lips brushed the pale skin of her knuckles. The gesture was so deeply respectful, so intimately submissive, that several nobles visibly swayed in shock. When Emery straightened, he did not release her hand. He finally turned his silver eyes toward Caleb, who was currently trembling so violently his teeth were chattering. "You possess a remarkably loud voice for a man with such little vision, Alpha Ashburn," Emery said, his tone lethally quiet. My king," Caleb stammered, his eyes glued to the floor. I was merely— You were merely showcasing your own ignorance," Emery interrupted smoothly. He took a half step closer to Natalia, effectively shielding her with his massive frame. "You look at her and see a dormant wolf. You see a lack of wealth because her family's bank accounts are empty. You are blind to the truth of what she is." Emery turned his gaze back to Natalia, his expression softening into something entirely unreadable to the crowd, but deeply intimate to her. "You are not a dull blood, Natalia of House Smith. Your wolf has not failed to manifest. She has simply been waiting for an equal. Waiting for a mate whose spirit would not be instantly crushed by her presence." A collective intake of breath swept the room. The implication was staggering. Emery looked back at the crowd, his voice projecting with the absolute authority of a sovereign. "House Smith holds the oldest blood in this continent. They are the descendants of the Moon Blessed, a lineage thought eradicated. Her aura is not absent. It is masked by its own sheer density. I have spent the last century searching for the true heir of the Smith line, waiting for her to come of age." He looked down at Caleb, who was now weeping silently, realizing the catastrophic magnitude of his error. He had not just insulted a poor noblewoman, he had publicly berated the king's true mate. "You are correct about one thing. Ashburn, Emery whispered, though the acoustics of the hall carried the threat perfectly. No ordinary man would choose her. A fragile, insecure boy desperately clinging to his new title could never handle a queen. She was never meant for the likes of you. Emery raised his free hand, and two heavily armed royal guards stepped out from the shadows of the pillars. Alpha Ashburn and his new companion are leaving. Escort them back to their borders. If I ever see him within 500 miles of my mate again, the Ashburn pack will need a new Alpha by sunrise. Caleb tried to speak, to beg, but the guards seized him and Victoria by their arms, dragging the disgraced couple out of the grand hall. The heavy oak doors slammed shut behind them, echoing like a gunshot. Emery turned his full attention back to Natalia. The terrifying, oppressive aura in the room instantly evaporated, replaced by the warm, intoxicating scent of pine and rain. He brushed a stray lock of hair behind her ear, his touch agonizingly gentle. "Forgive the theatrics, little wolf," the king murmured, his silver eyes flashing with a hidden warmth. "But I have waited 300 years to find you. I was not about to let a fool ruin our first dance." Natalia stared up at the most powerful man in the world, the heavy, dormant beast inside her suddenly clawing at her ribs, roaring into vibrant, terrifying life. The orchestra, terrified into compliance by a single sharp glare from the captain of the royal guard, hastily struck up a waltz. It was a trembling, frantic melody at first, but King Emery led Natalia onto the polished marble floor with such fluid, mesmerizing grace that the musicians soon found their rhythm. Every eye in Winterbourne Keep was fixed upon them. The nobility watched in stunned, breathless silence as the outcast of House Smith danced with the Alpha King. As Emery pulled her closer, his hand resting firmly against the curve of her lower back, the ambient temperature around them seemed to rise. Natalia gasped, her fingers digging into the immaculate wool of his suit jacket. The heavy, dormant weight in her chest, the void she had always believed was a profound defect, began to crack. It was not breaking apart. It was hatching. "Breathe, Natalia," Emery murmured, his lips brushing the shell of her ear. The scent of him petrichor, sharp pine, and raw, untamed power flooded her senses. Do not fight her. Let her stretch. A sensation like molten gold poured through her veins. Her vision blurred, then snapped back into focus with terrifying, hyper-realistic clarity. She could suddenly hear the erratic heartbeats of the lords and ladies 50 feet away. She could smell the sour tang of their fear, the bitter jealousy radiating from the Harrington delegation, and the lingering, pathetic scent of Caleb's panic fading into the night. Then came the voice. It did not echo in the room, but resonated deep within the cathedral of her own mind. It was a feminine, ancient sound, laced with the rumble of thunder. "Mine," the beast purred, feeling the king's unyielding aura wrapping around them. "Our king, our mate." "She speaks," Emery noted, a rare, genuine smile touching his lips as he caught the sudden flash of luminescent silver in Natalia's dark eyes. "I can feel her. She is magnificent. She is furious," Natalia whispered, her voice dropping an octave as the wolf's aggressive, protective instincts bled into her consciousness. The humiliation she had endured at Caleb's hands earlier was suddenly replaced by a towering royal indignation. How dare a lesser wolf speak to her in such a manner? "Good," Emery replied smoothly, twirling her expertly to face the stunned crowd. "Use that fury. You will need it for what comes next." Before the song concluded, Emery abruptly stopped. He offered her his arm, and without a backward glance at the trembling aristocracy, he escorted her out of the grand hall. The heavy oak doors sealed behind them, shutting out the whispers and the glaring lights. A massive, armored carriage awaited them in the courtyard, drawn by 4 midnight destroyers. The king's personal guard, clad in obsidian plate armor, saluted in perfect unison as Emery handed her inside. The journey to the Obsidian Palace, the royal seat carved directly into the sheer cliffs of the Blackwood Mountains, took 3 hours. During that time, the physical manifestation of her wolf fully integrated. The phantom aches she had suffered her entire life vanished, replaced by a terrifying, intoxicating vitality. When they finally arrived, Emery did not take her to the grand staterooms or the royal apartments. Instead, he led her deep into the subterranean levels of the palace, down winding staircases of black stone illuminated by flickering torches. "What Caleb said tonight, about your family's poverty, was only a fraction of a much larger lie," Emery spoke quietly, his voice echoing off the damp walls. Your family did not simply lose their fortune to poor investments and border skirmishes. He stopped before a massive, circular door wrought of solid iron and engraved with complex, celestial runes. Emery pressed his palm against the center. The runes flared with a blinding blue light, and the heavy door groaned open, revealing a cavernous vault. Natalia stepped inside, and the breath left her lungs. Mountains of gold bullion, ancient tapestries, and heavily bound ledgers were stacked to the vaulted ceiling. In the center of the room sat a glass display case holding an intricate, diamond-encrusted tiara that Natalia recognized instantly from her childhood history books. This. Natalia approached the glass, her hands trembling. This is the Smith heirloom, the crown of the first Luna. It was reported stolen a decade ago. I secured it, Emery confessed, stepping up behind her. Natalia, your family's financial ruin was not a natural decline. It was a calculated embezzlement, an economic assassination designed to mirror the ruthlessness of the human Rothschild banking syndicates. The lesser alphas, specifically Lord Richard Harrington and Caleb's father, Arthur Ashburn, systematically drained your family's assets. They funneled your wealth into offshore human accounts and forged deeds to steal your ancestral lands. Natalia spun around, her eyes flashing with a dangerous, predatory light. Why? Because the Smith bloodline is the only lineage capable of bearing a true Luna queen, Emery explained, his silver eyes dark with old anger. When my father died, the provinces grew bold. They knew I would eventually search for my mate. If I mated a Smith, the king's power would become absolute, unchallenged by the regional alphas. Harrington and Ashburn wanted to ensure your family was too weak, too impoverished, and too broken to ever reach the throne. They poisoned your father to make it look like illness, and they paid witches to cast suppression runes on your estate to keep your wolf dormant. The revelation struck her like a physical blow. Caleb hadn't just discarded her. His family had orchestrated her entire life's misery. They had stolen her wealth, murdered her father, and locked her wolf away in a cage of dark magic, all to consolidate their own petty power. And Caleb had the sheer audacity to stand in a ballroom and humiliate her for the poverty his own father created. Caleb! Natalia growled, her canines elongating sharply, her fingernails tapering into lethal claws. He knew. When he broke the betrothal to be with Victoria Harrington, he knew exactly what his family had done to mine. He knew. Emery confirmed, his voice hard. He played you, Natalia. He kept you close as a betrothed to monitor you, to ensure your wolf never woke. Once he secured the alpha title, he discarded you for his co-conspirator's daughter. Emery walked over to a heavy oak table covered in documents. I have spent 10 years quietly seizing these assets back, freezing their shadow accounts, and gathering the proof. I could not move openly without plunging the territories into civil war before I had my queen to stabilize the realm. He picked up a heavy, leather-bound ledger and held it out to her. The vault is yours, Natalia. The proof is yours. The throne is yours. Emery dropped to one knee, a king bowing in the dust of a subterranean vault. What are your orders, my queen? The summons to the Royal High Council arrived at the estates of Harrington and Ashburn at dawn, carried by the king's elite guard. It was an edict demanding their immediate presence at the Obsidian Palace. Failure to comply would be considered an act of high treason. By noon, the Grand Council chamber was filled with the 20 most powerful alphas in the unified territories. The air was thick with tension, pheromones clashing aggressively as rumors of the previous night's gala circulated. Caleb Ashburn stood near the center of the room, flanking Lord Richard Harrington. Caleb looked pale, the dark circles under his eyes a testament to a sleepless night filled with terror. Yet, under the protective wing of the Duke of the Northern Province, he tried to project an air of defiant confidence. The king has gone mad, Lord Harrington was whispering to a neighboring alpha. To claim a dormant dull blood as his mate? It is a trick, a political maneuver to shame us. We must demand a trial of blood to prove her illegitimacy. You will demand nothing, Richard. The voice did not belong to the king. It was smooth, imperious, and laced with a terrifying vibrational power that commanded the immediate obedience of every wolf in the room. The heavy mahogany doors at the head of the chamber swung open. Natalia stepped inside. She was no longer the impoverished noblewoman in a dated gown. She wore a tailored suit of charcoal silk that perfectly mirrored the king's, draped with a heavy cloak of royal velvet. Upon her head rested the diamond-encrusted Smith crown, gleaming under the chamber's skylight. But it was not the jewels that silenced the room. It was her aura. Natalia did not restrain her newly awakened wolf. She let the ancient, suffocating power of the moon-blessed bleed into the room. It rolled over the alphas like a tidal wave of crushing pressure. It was pure, unadulterated dominance. Several men gasped, their knees buckling under the sheer, atmospheric weight. Caleb choked, stumbling backward and catching himself on a heavy oak chair. He stared at Natalia, his eyes wide with a horrific realization. She was not dormant. She was a deity made flesh. King Emery followed a step behind her, his hands clasped behind his back, looking fiercely, intensely proud. He guided her to the twin thrones on the dais, but Natalia did not sit. She stood before the assembly, her gaze locking onto Caleb. Alpha Ashburn, Natalia spoke, the title dripping with disdain. Step forward. Caleb hesitated, looking desperately at Harrington for support, but the Duke was staring at Natalia in pale, sweaty horror, unable to speak. Slowly, trembling uncontrollably, Caleb stepped into the center of the room. "Last night you declared me unfit for your pack," Natalia said, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "You cited my poverty, and my lack of a wolf as a burden you could no longer bear." "Gee, Natalia," Caleb stammered, attempting a placating smile that looked more like a grimace. "My Luna. There has been a terrible misunderstanding. I was blinded by bad counsel. I always cared for you. Do not insult my intelligence, Caleb," she snapped, the sharp crack of her voice causing him to flinch physically. "You were not blinded. You were complicit." Natalia snapped her fingers. 4 royal guards entered the chamber, carrying heavy crates of ledgers and documents, dropping them onto the central table with a resounding thud. "These are the financial records of the Ashburn and Harrington estates over the last 15 years, Natalia announced to the wide-eyed council. They detail the systematic embezzlement of the Smith estate. They outline the bribery of human officials, the illegal acquisition of my ancestral lands, and the hired poisoners who murdered my father." Chaos erupted in the chamber. Alphas shouted in outrage, stepping away from Harrington and Caleb as if they were infectious. To attack another founding family physically was one thing. To assassinate them through human banking syndicates and cowardly poison was a violation of the sacred pack laws. "Lies!" Lord Harrington suddenly roared, stepping forward, his face flushed purple. "These documents are forged. The king wishes to consolidate power by destroying the North. I demand a trial by combat." Harrington began to shift, his bones cracking violently as he prepared to turn into a massive, gray-furred beast right there in the council chamber. He lunged toward the dais, aiming not for Emery, but for Natalia, hoping to sever the king's new bond before it could solidify. Emery didn't even twitch. As the massive gray wolf leapt through the air, jaws snapping toward her throat, Natalia did not flinch. She simply unleashed the full, unrestrained fury of her wolf. The sound she made was not a roar. It was a physical, concussive blast of alpha command. "Submit!" The force of her command hit Harrington mid-air. His wolf whimpered, his instincts brutally overriding his conscious mind. He crashed onto the marble floor, his body forcibly returning to human form, sliding to a halt at Natalia's feet. He pressed his face to the floor, weeping openly, entirely paralyzed by the Luna Queen's dominance. The silence that followed was absolute. No one dared to breathe. Natalia looked down at the trembling Duke, then shifted her terrifying gaze back to Caleb, who had fallen to his knees, his hands covering his head in submission. "Caleb Ashburn," Natalia said softly, the calm returning to her voice. "For crimes of treason, theft, and the murder of an alpha, you are hereby stripped of your title. Your lands are forfeit to the crown. You are banished from the unified territories, condemned to live as a rogue for the rest of your miserable days." She walked down the steps of the dais, her heels clicking ominously on the marble. She stopped directly in front of him. "Look at me," she commanded. Caleb forced his head up, tears streaming down his face, his eyes filled with absolute, soul-crushing regret. "You told the world that no one would choose me," Natalia whispered, ensuring only he could hear her final judgment. "You were right. A king chose me, and I choose to erase you." She turned her back on him and walked back to her throne, finally taking her seat beside Emery. The king reached over, intertwining his fingers with hers, the silver in his eyes blazing with a fierce, possessive love. "Guards," Emery ordered, his voice ringing with finality. "Remove the traitors, and let it be known across every border, to every pack, and every human syndicate. The queen has returned to her throne. As Caleb was dragged, screaming from the chamber, begging for a mercy he never afforded her, Natalia rested her head against Emery's shoulder. The long, dark winter of her life had ended. The dormant girl had died in the shadows of Winterbourne Keep, and in her place, a sovereign was born. The dormant girl the world sought to discard became the sovereign they were forced to worship. Beside Emery, Natalia ushered in an era of unprecedented peace and absolute justice, her reign a testament to the enduring power of the moon-blessed bloodline. Caleb's name faded into the dust of forgotten histories, while the Smith legacy burned eternal, a blazing beacon proving that true royalty is born, never made.